is Conspirinormal.
Well, real quick, is there any like assistance you could give us on naming the episode, because we don't want to put the word QAnon. Do they have any kind of like a code word or anything like?
That's an interesting question. Like, do you think
WW1GA?
Yeah, see, I was just about to ask. Do you think Facebook will be banning those things as well? Because then now you start getting into like, you know, the greatest story ever told, and all this other stuff that they throw out there. So is that going to be part of the keywords that are that are banned? It starts getting complicated after a certain point.
It does start getting complicated. Maybe I could just blank. Just like make it more, or like a question mark anon or something.
Yes, you can make it even more enigmatic that way.
Or use the next letter in sequence.
Yeah, you could do that. Or you know, yeah.
All right, guys, welcome back to Conspirinormal. And this is the first show that we have done fully after the Strange Realities Conference. And hello, Surfiel.
Hey, Adam, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. Just still kind of recovering from the hangover from Strange Realities. But we thought we would bring on a guest this week that we haven't had on in a little while, and that's Robert Guffey. Robert, welcome to Conspirinormal.
I thank you for having me on.
Yeah,
very well.
Yeah. I was. My dad was actually asking me today, like, who do you have on today? And I was like telling him about who you were and these articles that you've written, and said that I had spent like 4 hours with you in Long Beach, California. You know, talking about weird shit. We recorded like an hour of that, but it was like a 4-hour conversation. Yeah. And recently, you did a series of 5 articles over a series, I think, of about 5 weeks for Salon about QAnon. And this is something that we really have not touched on a lot. I think we've kind of danced around it a little bit in some discussions that we've had, but we're going to kind of like talk about it kind of full force tonight. So really, Robert, you know, I know that this is kind of a weird question, considering it's kind of hard to not have any attention brought to it. But what kind of first brought your attention to this, like, you know, odd conspiracy theory that a lot of people seem to be following these days?
Well, of course, I first was aware of it when Q first popped up on 4chan, which was, I think, November of 2017, but I didn't pay that much attention to it. I mean, I had friends who were following it, but I really didn't give it much attention, and didn't feel the need to give it much attention until really earlier this year, when it was just soon after the lockdown, and I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone, and I've known him for many years, and he's about 10 years older than I am, so he's in his 50s and lives in the Midwest, and he starts telling me about how COVID-19 is going to be a positive development for the United States in 2020. And I said, well, what do you mean? And then he starts telling me about how Trump, when he's reelected in 2020, the president's going to deliver free energy to everybody, and he's going to abolish the income tax. And at this very moment, and he was telling me this like in March, all these troops had been deployed underground where they were busy cleaning out covert subterranean tunnels, and he said they were saving hundreds of children, thousands of children from satanic slaves, and kicking out the, quote, black hats, unquote. And then he said that the news of this would be coming out soon. That's a consistent theme in the QAnon narrative. Is
right.
The news of this is going to break out soon. And he said, this is an exact quote, "Trump will have to use the emergency broadcast system to give this news to the American people because the media keeps lying and social media like Twitter and YouTube are censoring, deleting videos that report reality the way it actually is." And ironically, today, on October 6th, Facebook announced that they would be censoring any QAnon posts, which if I had a conspiratorial bent of mind, I would have to wonder, does the Facebook Corporation want to make it seem as if QAnon is 100% accurate?
Because that's the way to do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. When in history has someone's argument been weakened by suppressing it? Never. So true believers love martyrs, and this will only make it seem even stronger. Just earlier today,
it's just going to make it worse, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it surprises me that otherwise reasonable people do not see this. Q posted a link to an NBC story about Facebook banning QAnon with just 2 words just earlier today. It just said information warfare. So I mean, already that's the inevitable spin on it. It just makes Q's argument seem even more credible. So I asked him, well, what are you basing all this on? And so he sent me a bunch of links to the original Q posts and to various QAnon videos. And I immediately detected something that I don't think would be obvious to anyone who hadn't been intimately familiar with conspiracy theories going back 3 decades. And that is, and I think most reasonable people probably would have stopped watching after like a minute and a half. But I kept barreling through it all. And I noticed that the QAnon narrative, the mythology that has accrued over the past 4 years, it has been pilfered from previous sources, some of them going back to the late 1800s.
Right.
And the most fascinating pattern that I noticed is that they would take some sort of conspiracy theory, the original content of which was anti-fascist at its core, like some of the conspiracy theories of Mae Brussel from the 60s and 70s, and they would take it and flip it so that now it was pro-fascist, pro-conservative, pro-martial law, and ultimately, in the end, pro-Trump. And I thought, well, that's kind of suspicious. And so, for example, one of the main, I immediately recognized that a lot of this stuff was coming from Operation Vampire Killer 2000, which was a booklet that was published in the early 1990s. It was published by Jack McLam, who was an ex-police officer in Arizona, and he started this group called Police Against the New World Order. And this is in the early 90s, before the militia movement gets all tied up in Oklahoma City bombing, right? So at the beginning, if you're just reading Operation Vampire Killer 2000, it's clear that these people they're ex-law enforcement officers, they're libertarians, but they're not pro-Republicans. They were more, the main purpose of the pamphlet was to like warn people about factions in the government using a fake crisis to declare martial law, and these guys were libertarians who were opposed to militarizing the police. They were opposed to fascism, and they were opposed to the Republican Party. And so within a few years, these libertarians kind of morphed into the militia movement of the mid to late 90s. And so for decades, these people have been concerned about imminent martial law and about the possibility that there are these secret concentration camps being built across the United States, and they'd have documentaries that they would do and photographs of military bases where the chain link fences were facing inward rather than outward, and they said it was to keep the people in when they put all the true Christian patriots into the concentration camps, and this was going on for decades. Then suddenly, in November of 2017, when Trump was at his lowest approval ratings ever, Q suddenly appears and begins posting messages and photographs on 4chan that seem to indicate that this person has access to the White House. And then within weeks, the same group of people who had been so concerned about secret concentration camps suddenly spun around 180 degrees and decided, no, martial law is actually, it's a good thing because Q is saying that it's the damn liberals that we put into the concentration camps, not the right-wing Christians. So now it's okay. And I thought that was fascinating. I mean, to take a group of people who had this intense concern about imminent martial law for going back to the early 90s and to spin them around within a matter of weeks because of an anonymous poster on 4chan and say, oh, I see now, if Trump declares martial law, I shouldn't be concerned about that. I shouldn't run and grab my guns. This is all part of the plan. And I thought that was an incredible, almost like sociological or behavioral experiment.
Yeah.
And some say QAnon, it's a Russian disinformation campaign, and certainly maybe foreign intelligence agencies might be exploiting it. But to me, the telltale details and the cultural references, the references to adrenochrome and Hunter S. Thompson, and really obscure like Fordian figures like Richard Shaver,
right,
really point towards a source much closer to home. And it seems to me that it's some sort of group of people whose job was to steep themselves in fringe conspiracy culture, then retrofit it for the 21st century.
Right.
And I mean, right before we went on the air, you were mentioning the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases, and one of the links that my friend sent me was this guy named Rick Renee, the blessed something channel on YouTube, and there's thousands of followers. And he's
is that also with his mysterious friend Gene?
With his mysterious friend Gene, yes, who has his source of information is a Canadian intelligence officer, and Gene will post these drawings and paintings as evidence of the deep underground military bases. I mean, they're clearly paintings, and then he'll post them. He'll say, "Oh, you see, here's the underground base. Here's the blood-filled abattoir."
Man.
Underground,
Wow.
and no one ever stops and says, "Isn't that a painting? Isn't that clearly a drawing?"
Yeah, wasn't the blood stuff, the blood-filled abattoir stuff, wasn't that part of some of the original, like Dulce Base stuff? Because I remember Adam Gorightly telling us about that.
Well,
like there was a woman that went down supposedly, and she saw like vats full of blood and weird shit like that.
That's something I mentioned in the very last part of my QAnon series on Salon, is that I mentioned Greg Bishop's book, Project Beta, and Paul Benowitz, and how so many of these elements of the QAnon mythology seem to mirror so many aspects of the cover story that Richard Doty was feeding,
right.
that these intelligence officers were feeding Paul Benowitz, because to make a long story very short, Paul Benowitz, who lived next to this military base, thought he was seeing UFOs when in fact he was seeing these covert operations going on at the military base. So they decided, Benowitz went to them with his photographs and said, look what I've captured. Obviously there are these aliens observing your military base. And they said, oh no, now he's going to accidentally capture something, some sort of sensitive information. We need to send a bunch of decoys his way to keep him as far away from the truth as possible. So it was Richard Doty's job to keep feeding him all these little crumbs and little clues, and then Benowitz would pick up the crumbs, add his own interpretation of them, and then feed them back to Doty. And then Doty would take what he had made up and then give him some more confirmation bias, clues and evidence to keep the thing going. And eventually literally drove Benowitz crazy, where he ended up in a psych ward because they basically pushed him over the edge.
Yeah.
And one of those elements was that there were these deep underground military bases, subterranean wars between the military and these underground beasties. As you said, the abattoir of blood. It was, I believe, Krista Tilton who went down and saw the hybrids floating in these vats of fluid and etc. It's strange to me that there are so many mirrored elements from a story that we know was a military disinformation campaign directed towards Paul Benowitz. When we see these same elements pop up in QAnon, that should give one pause.
Right.
There was
because
also
that was to obscure, actual things he might have found out, and now that we know of, say, like actual human trafficking that relates to people in power, like the Epstein stuff. The QAnon the material seems to be obscuring people from going down, trails that could actually lead to real things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. There's a documentary called Out of Shadows, which I'm sure you're well aware of, which took the internet by storm back in April, I believe, and it's like a thinly disguised QAnon recruitment video. I don't think it ever even mentions QAnon at any point, though some of the participants will throw out some, QAnon code phrases like the greatest story ever told and all that kind of stuff. And in the documentary, they go into Jeffrey Epstein, they go into all this stuff, and everybody who's ever been connected to Hollywood is a Satan worshiper except Kanye West and Donald Trump. That was the main thing I came away from it. And despite the fact that Donald Trump is listed on page 85 of Jeffrey Epstein's little black book, he is not mentioned at all in the documentary in connection to Epstein. But Hillary and Bill, they go into them, in extreme detail. And it puzzles me why is Donald Trump then left out of this equation in the documentary? It seems to me that if Jeffrey Epstein, who clearly, probably 98% chance did not commit suicide, if he was in fact being sponsored by some sort of foreign intelligence agency, then obviously he's gathering blackmailable information to be used against the people who are listed in his book, and that would include people like Prince Andrew, it would include people like Bill Clinton, but it would also include Donald Trump. So why they only focus why they only focus on one half of the equation is mysterious to me. And then you have that the QAnon narrative also draws on a lot of the anti-Masonic, the anti-Illuminati stuff that goes way back to Leo Taxel's book, The Mysteries of Freemasonry, from the 1870s, where that was a hoax that went on for a decade or more, where Taxel made up this woman named Diana Vaughn, who was this sort of demonic, this woman who was consorting with demons. There's one point where Leo Taxel describes this woman who shapeshifted into a reptile and played the piano.
That's the David Icke stuff.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yes, yeah. It's a shapeshifting reptilian that that goes back to the 1870s.
Yeah.
And in fact, apparently one of Taxel's cohorts, who was aware that he was making all this stuff up, he goes, you may have gone a little too far with the woman who shapeshifted into the reptile and played the piano, and he was like, no, they'll love it. And that, among Roman Catholics who at the time just loved to eat up scare stories about Freemasons, they loved it. And Taxel actually came out and eventually had a press conference after about 12 years and said that this was the most fantastic hoax of our times. The greatest story ever told. It was the most fantastic hoax of our times, and he admitted to it. And then after he admitted to it, all the people who had been following the story just retrofitted his confession, into the story. Like, well, they made him say it was a hoax.
Oh,
there's a certain point where you can't. Nothing. If you're a true believer nothing you can say is going to break the hypnotic trance. You know, I mean, if photographs came out of Donald Trump consorting with some hairless 8-year-old waif with Jeffrey Epstein recording it all on a cell phone, they would say, oh, well, Donald Trump had to infiltrate them in order to fight the deep state. You know,
either that or they'd say it's like a deep fake or something like that because that technology exists. You know, they'd find some excuse to justify it. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And so getting back to Gene, to Rick Renee, who I assume is not related to Ralph Renee.
It's interesting, Robert, because sorry to cut you off there, but like I just wanted to make a point that like that little dynamic there between Rick and Gene is like exactly the same as like Steve Quayle and Hawk. Like it's exactly the same kind of thing.
Well, there's one particular interview where Gene says that, here's an exact quote: "The New World Order is in the final stages. That is, they were until Trump came along. The final stages of their satanic plan to reduce the current world population by 80 to 90%. If it weren't for Trump, most of us would not be listening to anything right now. Instead of the word of Christ, you'd be listening to the angels." So now you have a paradigm in which Trump has literally saved thousands of people from being eaten by demons.
Yeah. Well, for people like us who've been, into all this stuff for so long and understand the history of it, I mean, we instantly recognize so much of this stuff. But for a lot of these people in these new conspiracies, it's in a vacuum. And I think it's really great that you got the opportunity to write those articles for Salon to really explain it from the perspective of a veteran conspiracy theorist.
I think it's the very first time that any article on Salon has ever mentioned William Cooper, Richard Doty, Paul Benowitz, and Richard Shaver all in the same article. It was interesting. In response to, I have a friend who was among the first people reacting to Q when Q first posted that first initial post. And so my friend sent me an email, and I'd like to read this one small part of it. He says, a very high percentage of Q talk, especially early on, was purely tongue-in-cheek. The same people making Pepe memes were the same people posting Q talk on 4chan. After Trump's unlikely election, there was a giddy sense of hope for these particular people. Indeed, many people voted for Trump explicitly to function as a sort of hand grenade to the system that was. We were knowingly playing out a fantasy using the irreverent logic of memes. There were always a couple goofballs who seemed to take it seriously, but they were vastly outnumbered and ridiculed mercilessly. The real silliness of Q took hold when it escaped the confines of the Chans and the boomers got a hold of it. Boomers, being pre-internet, are almost universally incapable of understanding internet culture, especially the difference between what is literal and what is figurative. Your Midwest friend seems to fit in this category, ? Memes are mostly confusing to pre-internet people, and Q stuff was wrapped in so many layers of irony and reverse irony. In the early days of Q, we all knew adrenochrome was a meme. It's a funny word, and it's fun to make up lore about nonsense. There was some, quote, truth in the symbolic figurative sense. The elites do indeed tend to cultivate some odd taste, but we were mostly making can I curse on a...
Yeah,
that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we were mostly making shit up to ridicule and troll our enemies. So it's interesting that there is someone who was engaging in the initial post who understood that it was nonsense. But then, as you say, all these other people come in, and they're not familiar with this background of all these conspiracies, and they take this stuff completely literally, and they will quote. I mentioned in the article, there's this one guy who was quoting sections from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and it didn't seem as if he was aware that the book is intended to be humorous.
Yeah.
Like with the section where they first introduced the adrenochrome, and Terry Gilliam has talked about, if you listen to his director's commentary on the Criterion edition of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, he talks about how after they made the movie, people would come up to him and they would start talking about adrenochrome as if they'd taken it. And there's one point where he says, it fascinates me how the big lie, it works for everybody. It doesn't just work for Hitler, who came up with the term the big lie, but it even works for people like us. And when he said us, he meant like storytellers, filmmakers, artists.
Yeah.
You know, the bigger the lie, the more you're willing to accept it. And so it's absolutely amusing to me that these people will be quoting Hunter S. Thompson, and it's as if they're not even aware that it's supposed to be funny. And I mentioned at one point in the article that, in 2017 I published a book called Until the Last Dog Dies, a novel, which is all about a humor virus. It's not fatal. It just attacks the humor centers of the brain, and it becomes a pandemic and goes around the entire world, eating away at people's senses of humor. And the main character is a stand-up comedian in L.A., and halfway through the book he comes down with the virus, and so the humor starts leaking out of the book. And looking back on it, it's almost like completely prophetic when I when I read posts where they're quoting Hunter S. Thompson, not understanding that it's supposed to be funny. Also, there's another
adrenochrome thing in particular has taken on a life of its own outside of the Q stuff even, and I've heard second and third hand accounts of people's parents mentioning it, and my mom's an expert on adrenochrome and this and that, and it's just been like, what the hell is going on?
So kind of clarify this a little bit. So I've seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but so is adrenochrome a real thing, or did Hunter S. Thompson just make that up?
Well, it's Hunter S. Thompson made up the whole idea of adrenochrome. The main character, Raoul Duke, is in the hotel room with his Samoan attorney friend, Dr. Gonzo, and Dr. Gonzo who's an attorney. Dr. Gonzo tells him that he represented the Satanist freak, and he didn't have money to pay him, so he gave him this adrenochrome, which he said was this chemical harvested from the pineal gland of a living human being. And that it'll give you the highest high you've ever had in your life. And then they ingest the adrenochrome, and they have all these wild hallucinations. And, of course, in the film, that gives Terry Gilliam the leeway to do whatever the hell he wants, since it's a fictional drug in the first place. So as Gilliam says on the director's commentary, it's entirely a fictional drug. And it seems to me, from these kind of cultural references that are peppered throughout the QAnon narrative, I mentioned in the part 5 that QAnon's the ultimate catfish scheme, because I imagine all these people following all this, imagining in their head who they think Q is, when if they could actually see that it's this ragtag group of 30-year-old hipsters with tattoos and piercings who have been hired by some political think tank to make up all this weird stuff and just keep posting it. It's like some political think tank has been hired to harvest all these crazy fringe conspiracy theories. It's like a group of culture vultures who figured out all we need to do is hijack all these previous concepts. For example, Robert Anton Wilson's whole idea of the Operation Mindfuck, which he first introduced in his novel Illuminatus, which he wrote with Robert Shea, and then later expanded on the idea in his book Cosmic Trigger. But the idea of Operation Mindfuck absolutely perfectly parallels the QAnon thing, except it's coming from the right instead of the left. Right. Let me read you a brief section from Cosmic Trigger. Robert Anton Wilson writes, this is in 1977, "The underground press was intensely gullible and eager to believe all manner of conspiracy theories, the weirder the better. Most Discordians at this time were contributors to underground newspapers all over the country. We began surfacing the Discordian Society, issuing position offering nonviolent anarchist techniques to mutate our robot society. Along with this, we planted numerous stories about the Discordian Society's eon-old war against the sinister Illuminati. We accused everybody of being in the Illuminati. Nixon, Johnson, Wayne Buckley Jr., ourselves, Martian invaders, all the conspiracy buffs, everybody. We did not regard this as a hoax or prank in the ordinary sense. We still considered it guerrilla ontology. My personal attitude was that if the New Left wanted to live in the particular tunnel reality of the hardcore paranoid, they had an absolute right to that neurological choice. I saw Discordianism as the cosmic giggle factor, introducing so many alternative paranoias that everybody could pick a favorite if they were inclined that way. I also hope that some less gullible souls, overwhelmed by this embarrassment of riches, might see through the whole paranoia game and decide to mutate to a wider, funnier, more hopeful reality map. So I think somebody somewhere came up with the idea, hey, we can just hijack that idea and just flip it. So we'll just take all these pre-existing concepts and flip them. So with the libertarian militia movement in the 90s being concerned about martial law, we'll flip that. And so they'll be, instead of being scared of martial law, they'll welcome it. We'll take Operation Mindfuck, and instead of all these left-wingers and anarchists accusing William F. Buckley and Nixon being in the Illuminati, we'll just accuse all of them being in the Illuminati. And everything gets... it's almost like QAnon is a secular religion because there are a lot of evangelical Christians who are deep into it, but you don't necessarily need to be Christian. I mean, you could be an atheist and still believe that there are these wacky cultists running around kidnapping children, dragging them underground, and sacrificing them to non-existent deities. Yeah. You could be a fan of the paranormal. You could be into conspiracy theories. You could be, I mean, I know people who are like former Democrats who are like now totally into QAnon.
Really? Yeah, I think it's kind of like in kind of new age circles now too. It's really becoming popular. It's not just like you said, an evangelical Christian thing.
It has a lot of religious components because you have like almost this secret chief type of relationship going on to the, we're getting these messages channeled from somebody, we don't know who they are, we're just awaiting this message. It's got a lot of parallels to different religions and new religious movements.
Oh, there was a great article published just recently about the Omega Kingdom Ministry. Do you know what that is?
No.
There's this man named Mark Andre Argentino, and he's doing a PhD thesis on extremist religious and political organizations and how they create propaganda and recruit new members. And so he's been monitoring via Zoom the first public services of what is essentially a QAnon church, and it's called the Omega Kingdom Ministry.
Oh my God.
And this guy, he spent 12 weeks attending the 2-hour Sunday morning services. And so basically the QAnon conspiracy theories are reinterpreted through the Bible every Sunday. So they spend the entire time taking the latest Q posts and then applying them to the Bible. And it says here in the article, the Sunday service is led by Russ Wagner, leader of the Indiana-based OKM, and Kevin Bushy, a retired colonel running for election to the Maine House of Representatives. The service begins with an opening prayer from Wagner that he says will protect the Zoom room from Satan. This is followed by an hour-long Bible study. This is followed by an hour-long Bible study where Wagner might explain the fall cabal video that attendees had just watched or offer his observations on socio-political events from the previous week. Everything is explained through the lens of the Bible and QAnon narratives. Bushy then does 45 minutes of decoding items that have appeared recently on the app called QMAP that is used to share conspiracy theories. The last 15 minutes are dedicated to communion and prayer. So yes, there's definitely a religious component, but then it's not exclusively religious. So it's almost like somebody figured out, well, all the hardcore evangelicals that George George W. Bush used to get it into office. Why limit us? Why limit ourselves to them? We can exploit them, and then we can also exploit all these other people too who aren't necessarily Christian.
Right.
And in fact, there was a great article in Mother Jones just a few days ago. Ollie Breland's QAnon is attracting cops, and it's all about all these cops who are into QAnon. And it says some people in power have been asked to answer for QAnon supporters in their proximity. They have acted as if the conspiracy is ultimately harmless, but this is a dangerous misconception, especially when it comes to government agents and power to use force. The logic of the conspiracy theory almost requires its adherents to carry out acts of violence. If you actually believe that elites are harboring scores of children in underground tunnels to rape and steal blood from, taking action to liberate them would be a moral imperative.
Yeah.
And in an odd way, it kind of ties back in, because someone might argue, well, didn't you write this weird book called Camellia and say a bunch of like weird stuff in there, and isn't that hypocritical in some way? You talk about conspiracies in there, so why are those conspiracies more valid than the conspiracies that QAnon is talking about? But if you recall, in Camellia, which is all about my friend being stalked and harassed and surveilled, what would happen there is, and I've talked to many other people who've been in the same situation, where if you've been chosen as a target, they will make up the strangest things, come to your neighborhood and tell everyone in your neighborhood that you are either a Satanist, a terrorist, a pedophile. When my friend Damien went to stay with the mother of his child, she told him how these cops came by and were looking for him, and they said, yeah, we've been told that he's thinking about doing something. So they don't say outright, we think he's a terrorist. They just say very vaguely, we think he's doing something. So now you have all these cops who are into QAnon who think that there were all these Satanist liberal pedophiles out there. And basically, it's almost as if the scenario I wrote about in Camellia, which was directed at one person, my friend Damien, that scenario is now being applied to the whole country and indeed globally. Wow. Everybody's getting gang stalked.
I mean, I don't know how it is there in Southern California, but I mean, out here, I guarantee you, at least one truck in every Walmart parking lot has a Q sticker on the back.
Yeah,
I'm seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, It is literally everywhere. I've seen it too.
Yeah, and then they'll make their kids wear QAnon T-shirts. There's ironically, there was a guy who was so concerned about the elites kidnapping children that he went out and kidnapped his own kids. So he was so concerned about kids being kidnapped that he went out and kidnapped his own kids from his wife, from whom he was estranged. And this was written about on Daily Beast from Will Summers' article, QAnon promotes pedo ring conspiracy theories. Now they're stealing kids. Let me read you just a few paragraphs from this. It says, QAnon conspiracy theorist Albus Slyman pushed his Honda Odyssey past 110 miles per hour while his 5 children screamed in the back of the minivan, and police officers from 2 states pursued him down the highway. Donald Trump, I need a miracle or something, Slyman, a 29-year-old Boston man, said during his June 11th chase across Massachusetts and New Hampshire in remarks captured on a live stream. So in live stream, he's talking to QAnon and Donald Trump, and he yells out, QAnon, help me! QAnon, help me! It's not clear what set off the police chase, but Slyman appears to have been convinced by QAnon theories that the government was out to kidnap his children. Inspired by videos he had watched online, Slyman warned his children during the chase that the police were coming to abduct them or maybe just shoot them in a staged killing. In return, they begged him to pull over. His daughter even tried to grab the wheel of the minivan and drive it off the road after he accused her and his wife, who had dived out of the vehicle at the start. I love that the wife abandoned the vehicle. She's just I'm getting out of here. Trust me, kids, I'm going for help. And then she just dived out the back. who had dived out of the vehicle at the start of the chase of being agents of the nefarious cabal that QAnon believers say controls the world. They want to make us crazy, Slyman said. But I'm not crazy. My wife and my daughter were a part of it. So then they shot out the wheels of his car and sent him to jail. Or maybe they sent him underground and they fed him to the demons. I guess that's possible as well.
They might have done that.
After harvesting the adrenochrome.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's most important to do that when they're still alive.
There was another woman. There was a woman that actually did something. She was trying to get, she went and tried to get her kids out of child protective services or something. Or maybe she was just trying to get, other people's kids out of child protective services.
Oh, yes. Well, and of course there was the guy who threatened to blow up the Boulder Dam unless they released some report that Q had been posting about at that time. And then, obviously, then the most infamous one is the guy who went to the Comet Ping Pong pizzeria, which is like Mordor in Lord of the Rings. It's Sauron's home base. The Comet Ping Pong. And of course he went there with a gun to try to save the kids who were trapped in the basement, but then he shot up the floor trying to shoot into the basement, which supposedly is where the kids were. So I don't know why you'd shoot into the floor into the basement to save the kids who were trapped in the basement. And then when they arrested him, he had this great quote where he said, I don't think my intel was 100% correct. It's like the understatement of the year, and they all use military lingo. They've never been in the military, but it's my intel wasn't 100% correct. Now, I had a friend tell me that one of the theories was that the guy went in and he shot up the computer. He shot up the dude who owns the pizzeria. He shot up his computer, which had all the incriminating information on it, and that was the reason. That, in other words, he was actually like a dupe puppet of the elite, and he got in to destroy the computer that had all the incriminating information on it, which I thought, when Jeffrey Epstein was being surveilled in Florida, somebody in the police department tipped him off, and so he had all these computers filled with incriminating information. So what he did was he got rid of the computers. He didn't mind control someone to drive hundreds of miles to come to his house to shoot up his computers. He just got rid of them before the police came.
It makes perfect sense, Robert. I don't know why you don't believe that.
Well, and you talk about how Pizzagate was that embryonic phase of all this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In the Out of Shadows documentary, they end on Pizzagate. They spend about 20 minutes on Pizzagate, and they interview the journalist Liz Cronkin, who was the main writer who was writing about all this. And when it starts, the Out of Shadows is 120 minutes long, and then about 20 minutes of it is devoted to Pizzagate. So you would think they would start off the Pizzagate segment with their best evidence. Right, to really just slam it home right at the beginning. And it starts out by quoting John Podesta in these emails, saying that he had gone with his brother to eat pizza for an hour. And then the narrator says with a complete straight tone of voice, who eats pizza for an hour? This was the evidence that they started out with. How on earth could Podesta and his brother be eating pizza for an entire hour, despite the fact that every labor union in America considers an hour to be a legitimate time to eat lunch? And
that's striking, Robert. That's striking evidence.
If they weren't eating pizza for an hour, there was only one other alternative. Either A, they were eating pizza, or B, they were having sex with young boys. It's either A or B. There's no other possible alternative. And that's the way the entire Pizzagate segment is presented in Out of Shadows. This is their best evidence. Now, of course, you could, and then they say, well, Comet Ping Pong, they had a triangular symbol that these other pedophiles have been known to use. That pedophiles have been known to use this kind of triangular symbol to represent their illegal activity. Okay, let's say that that's true. There are, in fact, a limited number of shapes in the universe. And if I were to pick a shape for a pizza joint, I would think that a triangle would be more appropriate than an octagon or some other shape that you might think of. And yet they don't seem to stop and consider that. Instead, they go to this other conclusion. Cory Doctorow wrote an article. Cory Doctorow, who's the science fiction writer, he's best-selling science fiction writer, award-winning science fiction writer. Cory Doctorow wrote an article about QAnon, and he wrote this in May of this year. Why is it so easy to find people who want to believe in conspiracies? My answer, because so many of the things that have traumatized so many people are conspiracies. The opioid epidemic was a conspiracy between rich families like the Sacklers and regulators who rotated in and out of industry. The 737 crisis was caused by Boeing's conspiracy to cut corners and aviation regulators' conspiracy to allow aerospace to regulate itself. Senators conspired to liquidate their positions ahead of coronavirus lockdown. Well-heeled multinationals conspired to get 94.5% of the small business PPP fund. Big tech conspires to fix wages with illegal collusion, while fast food franchises do the same with non-competes. In a world of constant real conspiracy scandals that destroy lives and the planet, conspiracy theories take on real explanatory power. So, which I would, agree with, and I want to make it clear that obviously I've written about conspiracies in the past. In my first book, Eschatology, in Cameleo. So I'm not saying that conspiracies don't happen. Of course, they happen all the time. People are every day being convicted on conspiracy charges somewhere in the United States. So I'm not saying that these things don't happen, nor am I saying that obviously child trafficking happens. It's a major problem.
Sure.
And when there was a reporter recently who asked Joe Biden about QAnon, and I thought it was really strange the way he phrased the question. He said, Mr. Vice President, what do you think of this QAnon whole fad, whatever, and their conspiracy theories? They're very strange. They believe in child trafficking. And then Biden was like, yeah, they're mentally ill. And I thought, was this question phrased? It's almost like what I said earlier about the Facebook, about Facebook banning QAnon. It makes you stop and wonder, are they promoting QAnon? The way the reporter asked the question is as if he was saying there's this weird cult of people who believe that child trafficking is happening. And it's not the way I would have phrased that same question. I mean, that's not the ludicrous part of it. Obviously, child trafficking is happening, but the way Q posts these things is it draws connections in such a way that the people listening to it think, well, obviously Jeffrey Epstein, had connections to these people and these people. So then when they come in and they add the extra layer of the Illuminati and the Freemasons, no one stops to think, well, we've heard all of Jeffrey Epstein's victims have come out. Well, many of them have come out. We've heard them interviewed.
Right.
They've talked about what Jeffrey Epstein would do. Not one of them has ever said, oh, yes, Epstein came out. He was wearing a crimson cowl, and he took me down to the subterranean abattoir where the obsidian statue of Baphomet was there, and then sacrificed all these kids. Every one of Epstein's victims tells pretty much the same story, and Epstein's behavior is pretty much casebook narcissistic predatory behavior. It doesn't violate anything that we know about sociopaths and narcissists.
That's the thing, is like, it's bad enough. It's bad enough behavior. Like, why do we have to put in the weird cult and the demons and it's bad enough as it is.
Well, right. That and that ties into something. One of the main villains in the QAnon narrative all year has been Black Lives Matter. So I've been reading what Q posts about Black Lives Matter, and so recently he's been posting all this stuff that members of Black Lives Matter have been causing the fires on the West Coast to get people to hate Trump. So now, why members of Black Lives Matter would want to burn down states like California, Oregon, and Washington to direct hatred toward a Republican politician these states already voted against back in 2016, I don't know. And it seems likely that the intent of these things is to distract attention from far more important things, like the fact that for the past few years, whenever fires have broken out in these same states, Trump, in fact, there was in the New York Daily News, it says the last 2 years, aid to California did eventually materialize, but likely despite, not because of the president. Former Department of Homeland Security Chief of Staff Miles Taylor disclosed this week, as he endorsed Joe Biden, that 2 years ago Trump directed FEMA to withhold assistance for purely vindictive personal reasons. Quote, he told us to stop giving money to people whose houses had burned down from a wildfire because he was so rageful that people in the state of California didn't support him and that politically it wasn't a base for him, unquote. So they will post these things to distract attention away from far more important things. And so recently, right after the George Floyd protest began, it was only a few days after George Floyd was murdered, that the QAnon crowd began sharing a meme that featured this photo that depicted a bronze statue of Baphomet that had been erected by the Satanic Temple in Salem, Massachusetts. And so the purpose of the meme was to question why Black Lives Matter, why these protesters had not bothered to attack this particular statue of Baphomet. And the implication, of course, was that Black Lives Matter protesters are secretly Satanists, and that's why they left alone the Baphomet statue in Salem, Massachusetts.
I've seen similar things of saying like a statue. There's like a statue of Lenin somewhere, and they're like, why did they tear this statue down? You know, like
it for some reason they don't stop and think, well, maybe the Black Lives Matter protesters, they're not particularly afraid of bat-winged goat gods erupting from the bowels of the earth to ravage their families. They're concerned about racist white men in uniforms arbitrarily wiping out their lives with no consequences whatsoever. So unlike the scores of videos we've seen over and over again of black people being harassed or outright killed by police officers throughout the decades, there's not a single shred of evidence that children of any race are being slaughtered by members of the Illuminati. Instead of being concerned about the problem that's happening like in their streets right at this very moment, they instead prefer to worry about children they've never seen being victimized by perps who don't exist.
And that's what they've really been hooking people with, is the child trafficking stuff. I mean, me and Adam have both seen it. People who were not into this kind of conspiracy stuff be like totally triggered by this and go down these rabbit holes. And of course, we're familiar with the most recent iteration of all this stuff before this was, and before Pizzagate was the Satanic Panic. So it's like, it's all very familiar to us, but it is just getting a whole new generation, and the boomers, they're going crazy on this stuff.
Well, see, this has been brewing for some time, especially with like trying to bring the Satanic Panic back. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, Robert, about the Black Lives Matter, because now, you know, I don't know if you know who Russ Dizdar is. I actually had him on the show way back when, but he's one of these guys that's just like a holdover from the Satanic Panic era. And he believes that like these MK Ultra super soldiers are going to be like infiltrating churches, and they're going to something called the Black Awakening is going to happen, and that these people are just going to go crazy and start causing chaos. So now there's certain people, I don't know if they're really associated with QAnon, they're starting this whole narrative that that's what's happening now. The BLM and some of the riots that are going on is all due to like these MK Ultra super soldiers that are, you know, multiple personalities. And it's just, that's a direct link to something that's like, you know, Satanic Panic era stuff, and also has got like, you know, transformation of America and all this kind of like weird mind control literature that, you know, that you point out in the articles too. And it's really just, quite disturbing how people have just like glommed onto all this.
And the thing that I notice about the Out of Shadows documentary is that they take those things that are in fact true. MK Ultra did in fact happen. There were horrible mind control experiments on children in the 1950s. There was the Clinton administration, in fact, did an entire investigation into the radiation experiments that were done on children, which overlapped. The same people who were doing those radiation experiments were often the same people doing the MK Ultra mind control experiments, and they experimented on children, on prisoners, on people in mental asylums. Like that actually happened, and it's almost to me like it's similar to people I knew in high school who were told if you smoke marijuana, you're going to go crazy. And so they smoked marijuana, and they said, I didn't go crazy. You know what? They're probably lying about cocaine, crack, and LSD as well. And then before long, they were like injecting crystal meth into their veins. It's almost like they lied to us about this, whether it's MK Ultra, or whether it's the JFK assassination. So they lied to us about that. So then this other stuff must be true as well. And that's the logic that's used in the Out of Shadows documentary. They establish the MK Ultra stuff, and then they go on from there to try to say, well, that's true, so therefore, obviously, then this other stuff must be true as well. And there's really no connection between them. And then, by the way, that's another example of the way that QAnon will take a pre-existing conspiracy theory and flip it. They used one of those examples appears in the Out of Shadows documentary. Mae Brussel talked about what she called Operation Chaos, which she believed that there were certain high-profile rock stars who were being assassinated, Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin. And so one of the things that they do in Out of Shadows is they take that and they flip it so that now they imply that Jim Morrison, because his father was in the military, somehow involved in the Gulf of Tonkin, and that Frank Zappa's parents were in the military, they imply that Frank Zappa and Jim Morrison were like mind controlled to create this kind of satanic music to pull otherwise rational teenagers into taking drugs. And my own experience with teenagers is that they don't need a vast CIA conspiracy to be encouraged to take drugs. Right. But that's another example of that. And also, in terms of, it's interesting what you say. Like they've taken the Satanic Panic thing from the 80s and then overlap that with the Black Lives Matter thing, so that in the Q's June 1st, 2020 post, this was 1 week after the murder of George Floyd, Q posted, "Black community used as pawns? ? Welcome to the Democratic Party." And then in caps, "Unity creates peace. Unity is humanity." It almost looks like it's all in caps, so it's almost like ignorance is strength, like from 1984.
Yeah, I was getting that vibe.
And so according to this scenario here, is that black people aren't smart enough to make their own decisions. The puppeteers in charge of the Democratic Party, they're making the decisions for them. And the definition of unity is sitting at home, not protesting when police officers are killing you, and voting for Trump. That's the definition of unity. And the idea that most of the protesters are just simply pissed off about hundreds of years of injustices dealt to them by law enforcement, it doesn't seem to occur to them, or if it does occur to them, they consciously choose to just believe in a lie instead. So all that is fascinating.
Well, I was going to say, like you mentioned, Transformation America and some of that Satanic Panic stuff. What creeps me out is that a lot of these people are getting, it seems like they're getting some kind of weird prurient or voyeuristic, enjoyment out of obsessing over these, fictional details of what's being done to people. And it's like, just like with the, those books that were, pretty much porn for conservative Christian conspiracy theorists. It's that same kind of thing. And I'm just like thinking, I'm seeing people just obsess over this material, and like, why do you want to just obsess over this stuff so much. There's a weird element to it that really bothers me.
It definitely becomes evident when you in post after post after post, and I mentioned in there around about 2000 or 1999, I sent a copy of Transformation of America by Kathy O'Brien to my friend Damien, and this was before he got wrapped up into his own insane conspiracy in Camelio. I sent him a copy of Transformation of America, and he read it, and I remember him calling me and saying, it feels like it's pornography for Christians. It's like they can read about all the sordid details of what Hillary is doing to this poor young woman in a hotel room somewhere, and they can like be disgusted by it, but at the same time kind of be weirdly turned on by it. And so when you see the QAnon people posting all these kind of vaguely blurred out photos of child pornography, where you wonder what exactly is going on here, And then when you hear them saying, like in the Out of Shadows documentary, there's the Hollywood stuntman who says, this is the greatest story ever told, which is that's a direct QAnon like slogan. This is the greatest story ever told. You think so? It's like Homer's Odyssey and Don Quixote and Moby Dick are not the greatest stories ever told. The greatest story ever told is about the elites raping young children. Why is that the greatest story ever told? I mean, the word story implies it's entertaining. So for some reason, you're entertained by that.
Yeah, exactly. It's really crazy. And I mean, like, I think there is a certain amount of like that prurient interest, it's like, I discovered the same in kind of I think the fringe Christian community is really kind of, lends itself to some of this QAnon stuff, but like, it's the same way. It's just like, they're so fascinated with like what Aleister Crowley did at a certain point, and like the horrible things he did in the Abbey of Thelema. They're just fascinated by this stuff. It's just, they talk against it, but then it's just like, look what he did to the woman and the goat. And all, it's just like, it's just weird, man.
When you mentioned the satanic panic of the 80s, I flash back to when I was in high school. Me and my friends found this flyer that was on the wall near the gymnasium, and it said that there was going to be a PTA meeting that night on occult rock. And so I said, we got to go to this.
Was John Todd there?
It was a guy whose name was ironically this person whose name escapes me. He was totally against like violence in media of any form, Saturday morning cartoons, Dungeons and Dragons, and he recently, not long ago, was arrested for like sexually assaulting one of his patients. It was a doctor, Dr. Thomas Radecki. Radecki, Dr. Thomas Radecki. He was the head of this organization, this movement to crack down on occult violence in popular media. And he wasn't there physically, but the phys ed teacher / the sex education teacher, who was this German man named Mr. Berger, who always wore these tight golf pants. He was up there behind the podium playing this VHS lecture by Thomas Radecki, talking about the occult symbolism. And they did the same thing where they would take something that was clearly intended to be ironic, and then they would interpret it literally. Like they had this big quote from Frank Zappa, and Frank Zappa had said something like, oh yes, our intent is to putrefy the minds of young children, and anyone who knows who Frank Zappa is knows what his sense of humor is like, and that he clearly was saying that sarcastically. Right. But they put it without context, and they put it up on the screen, and so it's like, oh my God, Frank Zappa said that. He admitted it, and I remember at this meeting, I went there with, in fact, Damien was there with me, and two other friends of mine. And they did not like us being there, because everyone there, they were adults, except for two other guys who were in the front, who were kind of like A students, who came dressed very nicely, and they came to like rationalize with them, to like have a rational argument, which that never works out anyway. So we sat there and listened to this whole thing, and at one point this woman stands up, and she starts telling the story about this game that was like Dungeons and Dragons, but she said it was called the Seven Gateways, and it was a game that her children were playing, and they would go in the basement and they would pretend to be living in some fantasy world. And she said after they got done playing the game, her daughter had scratches on her back, and she implied that it was demons had come through the gateway, that they had like unconsciously or purposely summoned some sort of demon while playing this role-playing game, and the demons had scratched her daughter's back. And everyone in the auditorium just kind of like nodded their head, and I'm sitting there just completely going out of my mind. And here's the punchline to that. Earlier that day, her son, whose name was Kevin, came up to me and Damien and handed us 2 KKK flyers and said, "Just thought you'd like to be interested in this." And it wasn't handing it to me as a joke. He was totally into it. It was an actual like application form, and you could send in money, and they'd give you, I don't know, the starter kit. I don't know what exactly they would send you. And so, ironically, one of my friends turns to me and she says, "Hey, you know who that is?" And the woman talking, I go, "No." She goes, "That's Kevin's mom." And so that kid's mom, who gave us the KKK flyer earlier that day, was the one who was so concerned about the satanic panic. And perhaps in that anecdote, that one anecdote really kind of exemplifies the dichotomy, the cognitive dissonance of what's actually going on here.
Well, we talked about Pizzagate and the whole thing about the basement, right? Like the guy was thinking that the kids were stored in the basement and all like the underground stuff. All that just reminded me of the McMartin preschool case.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I know that Alex Constantine published a book called Psychic Dictatorship in the USA.
Yep.
And there's a chapter on McMartin there where he claimed that FBI agent Ted Gunderson, who is not the most reliable source, Gunderson claimed that he went to McMartin and because the kids were saying that there was these underground tunnels in which they were being ritually abused under the McMartin preschool. And Gunderson, everyone said we couldn't find it. And Gunderson said he went there, pulled up a few planks, and found the entrance and went in and took photos of it. And supposedly there are photos of those tunnels in Constantine's book. Now, Gunderson has said a lot of wild things, including Gunderson was the guy who started the rumor that Art Bell was a pedophile back in the 90s. Art Bell was getting all these phone calls. I remember at a certain point, people would be calling in, and Art Bell would hang up on him. And I was wondering, what's going on? And it wasn't until later that he talked about how Gunderson had a short-wave radio show and had started the rumor that Art Bell was a pedophile, and he encouraged people to call in to Coast and ask Art Bell, "Are you a pedophile?"
Wow.
And so Art Bell would just hang up on him. And so I don't know if we can trust Gunderson or if in fact those photographs actually came from the McMartin preschool, but Constantine claimed that they did. There's an interesting, all roads lead back to Damien. Back when Damien was in high school, his father was a narcotics cop, wanted him to go into this encounter group to prevent him from taking more drugs or saying curse words or listening to Jelly Opera albums, and so it was this like encounter group with other troubled teenagers. Now, McMartin Preschool was in Manhattan Beach, which is not far from, I grew up in Torrance, so it's not that far away. And that time period, the kids who were at McMartin would have been roughly like my age, or maybe just a little bit younger. And so Damien ends up at this encounter group, and every week he'd have to go there, and they'd go around the circle, and you have to tell what your problems were. One of the girls in the group claimed that she had been at the McMartin preschool, and Damien would actually look forward to hearing what she had to say every week, because she contended that all that stuff actually happened, and her memories were very vivid. And at that time, she said that stuff had actually happened. Now, that's, who knows? I mean, she was in a encounter group for troubled teens. I don't know. It's just an interesting footnote to all of that Damien actually met someone who actually went to the McMartin preschool.
Well, I have to wonder about that. I have to wonder if at McMartin there might have been some real sexual abuse that really did happen, but it just got so muddled with all the satanic panic shit that there was no way to prove it.
Yes, I mean, my friend and colleague, the late Walter Boart, who wrote Operation Mind Control, which was one of the first, really the first major book about MKUltra, he communicated with Kathy O'Brien. He knew her, and he believed that he believed that there was a core of truth to what she was saying, but that her mind and memories were so scrambled that you just could not know for sure what was fantasy and what had actually happened.
Yeah.
So
we kind of think the same thing about like James Shelby Downer too. That's kind of what we're.
And isn't that a fascinating case? And really, probably a figure I should have included in the Salon articles as one of those primary sources that has been distorted over the years. James Shelby Downer, Jordan Maxwell being another one, the among the first to sort of try to analyze occult esoteric symbolism in popular media.
So I want to talk about Paul Vallely and Michael Aquino and this group, this shadowy group called the Army of Northern Virginia. Not to be confused with the Civil War Army of Northern Virginia.
Yes, exactly. Well, isn't that a fascinating aspect to all this? That's kind of like the punchline in the 5-part series that I wrote for Salon, because in Out of Shadows, they dedicate about 10 minutes to Michael Aquino, who is now the late Michael Aquino. Michael Aquino died last fall, which I think is interesting because social media, which overlooks nothing, apparently is not aware that Michael Aquino died in, I think, November of last year. And then Out of Shadows comes out just a few months later. And Aquino is like a major part in the documentary. They dedicate about 8-10 minutes to Aquino, which is strange because you could include Aquino in the Satanic Panic of the 80s because he was accused of running a similar McMartin style, molestation operation out of the Presidio in San Francisco. And he was found to be innocent of those charges. Ostensibly, the purpose of Out of Shadows is to talk about the connections between Hollywood and the intelligence agency. I mean, that's how the documentary begins. And in fact, it does say some very worthwhile things about that. That's a worthwhile subject to look into. There's always been an overlap between the intelligence agencies and Hollywood, using Hollywood as a propaganda machine. That goes at least as far back as World War II. Aquino has no real known. He was an intelligence officer, a military intelligence officer whose specialty was propaganda, psychological warfare. He has no known connections to Hollywood, though, so I don't know why exactly they include him in the documentary. I mean, he appeared on one episode of Oprah Winfrey back in the 80s with his wife Lilith, and Aquino always to me looked like an overfed Eddie Munster. Like if Eddie Munster had grown up and eaten a lot of Twinkies, he would look like Michael Aquino. And by the way, Aquino, I wrote about Aquino in an article in Paranoia magazine that was later reprinted in my first book, Cryptoschatology. But Aquino wrote a letter to Paranoia magazine and said that he would either sue or they could print the letter. So the editor was just, well, we'll just print the letter. And I not exactly, he was not happy with some things that I said in the article, but I think that what he was unhappiest with was me criticizing his crystalline prose. He published Star Wars fan fiction in Forrest J. Ackerman's Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. And
I was gonna make a quip about that. Yeah.
and Darth Vader is kind of like the hero. And he wants to create a psycho-civilized society with his positronic computer. It's really weird. And apparently Aquino would stand out at the front gates of Lucas's ranch trying to get him to read his Star Wars screenplays for the sequels. I suspect Lucas never read them. I always wondered if Richard Doty. There's too many tangents going on. I realize that, but let's just go with it. Richard Doty, who was the military disinformation guy who was feeding all the information to Paul Benowitz. Richard Doty later went on to work on the X-Files. As he actually wrote some of the episodes under another name. At least this is according to Greg Bishop's book, Project Beta, which is an excellent book. And I always wondered if there's an episode of the X-Files called Musings of a Cigarette-Smoking Man, and it's all about how the cigarette-smoking man, who's this powerful, shadowy figure, really in his spare time writes all this really bad amateur like science fiction, and he can't get it published. He's like this frustrated writer, and eventually he manages to sell a story to some pornographic magazine, which is kind of like the high point of his existence, even though he's this like powerful guy pulling the strings from behind the curtains.
Right.
I always wondered if that was vaguely based on Aquino publishing this Star Wars fan fiction in Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine.
I always thought it might have been based on E. Howard Hunt.
That's true as well, because E. Howard Hunt wrote a lot of spy fiction under another name. So Aquino, in the documentary, they try to connect Aquino to. They talk about his paper Mind War, which was basically his study or manifesto that he wrote, commissioned by his superior officer Paul Vallely. Vallely asked Aquino, we really need some kind of new insights in how to operate psychological warfare post-Vietnam era. So this was like the early 80s. And so Aquino writes this paper called Mind War, and it's all about, well, how do we morph the techniques that we used to use in this new electronic environment? How do we access the media? And he goes into this whole thing about, well, you have to create a rapport. You can't force anyone to do anything. You have to create a rapport with the target, and then the target has to do what you want the target to do, but the target has to think it's their own idea. And in the Out of Shadows documentary, they showed the title page, Mind War, by Paul Vallely and Michael Aquino. And they go on for 8 or 10 minutes about how Michael Aquino is a Satanist, and there's this, quote, former, unquote, CIA agent named Kevin Shipp who says Aquino was basically laying out in this Mind War paper how to use satanic principles to mind control the population. Okay, at no point, just like they never mentioned that Trump's on page 85 of Epstein's Little Black Book, at no point do they mention that Paul Vallely, the man who commissioned Aquino to write this paper, is the only professional military officer who has come out in support of QAnon. Last year, it was around this time, I think it was in November of last year, Vallely went on this Canadian radio show and said that Q is a real person and that he gets his information from this organization, this organization of various intelligence agents, because he said Trump does not trust the CIA or the DIA, and so Trump is relying on this loose-knit group of about 800 intelligence agents, and Q either has contact with them or is one of them, and that all the information that Q is posting is 100% accurate. So everyone in the Q community was like, oh, wow, finally, this is confirmation that this isn't all just a hoax or a fantasy. This guy, a real highly respected military official, is going on the radio and publicly saying that Q is a real person. Is it not a strange coincidence that the only professional military officer who has come out in support of Q is the co-author of the paper that the QAnon documentary Out of Shadows says is a Satanist trying to control your mind? And then when you look at Mind War and you see what Aquino and Vallely write in it, and then you apply those principles to Out of Shadows, you think, okay, here's Out of Shadows, here's this documentary. It creates a rapport with its audience. It then basically pushes you towards a conclusion, but it never comes out and says vote for Trump in November. But it gives you all this information where you can come to no other conclusion. So by the end of the documentary, you will assume that you've come to this conclusion yourself. So you could easily take Vallely and Aquino's paper and apply it to the techniques that are used in the QAnon posts and the various QAnon videos that have been made.
So you would posit that this is not like a foreign intelligence agency that's doing this thing, that this is probably something that's more homegrown, and that what they're trying to do, like there's a real disturbing aspect to this, because it's not just like vote for Trump. I mean, they're also trying to get people to accept like martial law or people being put in camps, and you know, like the same group that used to really worry that they were going to be put into the FEMA camps are now like, you know, basically calling for them.
Yeah, exactly. That's the most disturbing thing about it. How do you get, you know, this rabid part of the population who would never accept these things under normal circumstances to accept them? And the idea that you could get them to change their mind based on an anonymous source on 4chan is actually, it's really unbelievable. I mean, I wouldn't doubt if the people who are behind all this, because it's not one person. Q is not one individual. It's clearly, right, that you can just tell that a number of different people are contributing to this. Team QAnon might be astonished at the success of it.
There's been a couple of guys that I think have been outed that they think may be part of this.
Right. Well, there was the one guy who they found was hosting one of the sites that was posting the Q post, and they always assume, well, because he was hosting it, he was probably posting the messages as well. It's not necessarily the case. I mean, other people could have been writing them, you know. And it's interesting that there's this kind of ever morphing ability to accept whatever new plot twist comes in and to twist it around so that Trump is never at fault. So even as Trump expands the swamp, you can say to yourself, well, no, he's draining the swamp. And as early as November 9th, 2016, there was an article in Bloomberg called U.S. Stocks Rise, Treasuries Fall as Trump Wins Spurs Growth Bets. So the authors identify a list of winners, economically speaking, in the wake of Trump's elections. They mention banks, drug makers, defense and infrastructure, and prisoner operators. It's a correction course soared on speculation the new administration will rescind the government contract phase-out. So it's interesting to me that they can sit there and assume that Trump is somehow anti-government, when as recently as December of 2018, Trump, he came out and he made the statement that the Pentagon's budget needed to be limited. He was going to cut the Pentagon's budget. That was in December of 2018. Then when it came to announce the budget, he ended up giving the Pentagon 5% more money than they had requested in the first place. So that's not anti-government. and so, you know, there was another article that was published just after he won called "Private Prison Stocks Are Surging After Trump's Win." This was also in Bloomberg. Quote, private prisons would likely be a clear winner under Trump, as his administration will likely rescind the DOJ's contract phase-out, and ICE capacity to house detainees will come under further stress, analysts at Height Securities LLC wrote in a note published this morning, referring to the Immigration and Customs Enforcement body by its acronym. Mass deportation of illegal immigrants would be likely to run into legal obstacles, quote, further necessitating a sizable contract detention population, unquote, the analyst said. I think it's fascinating that one of the main elements that pulls people in, particularly the evangelicals, is this idea of children being kidnapped, taken underground, put into cages, and then tortured. When meanwhile, the only person who is on record as doing that is the Trump administration taking immigrants, Mexican children, putting them in cages, and so it's a
thousands
standard,
going missing, of course.
It's a standard operating procedure to accuse the enemy of what you yourself are doing.
One last aspect of this I really want to touch on real quick is just this idea of participatory fiction and these role-playing games. Of course, like you remember Ong's Hat and things like that were more good-natured. But, you know, these people are participating in this kind of this role-playing game, and they aren't really aware of it.
Right, because it's all confirmation bias. Q will post something, and it'll be extremely enigmatic. There could be 1,000 interpretations of what it means. So then there's 1,000 responses to that. Some of those ideas then float to the surface. Then Team QAnon comes along, takes those most popular ideas, weaves it back in. So there's
it's like a cybernetic system, like a feedback loop.
Yeah, it's a constant feedback loop. And again, that's part of that creating a rapport. It's right out of Mind War. It's right out of Valet and Aquino's paper. They're creating a rapport by they're mirroring and matching. It's almost like a neurolinguistic programming kind of thing. They're mirroring and matching what the thoughts are of the people who are following them. And then they feed their own ideas back to them, and they think, wow, I've never heard that idea before. And when in fact it's the same idea, just slightly altered or with some extension added onto it. One aspect of this about how they can see the sort of thumbprint of Satan in almost anything. One of those conversations between Rick and his buddy Gene, they were
the mysterious Gene.
The mysterious Gene. Yes, he has to be mysterious because otherwise he'd be wiped out like that. Gene flashes a photo of Epstein's mosque temple, on Epstein Island, and the temple has these like horizontal lines on it, and it's surrounded by palm trees. So then Gene shows a photo of Ellen DeGeneres' set for her talk show, and on the wall behind Ellen you can see these horizontal lines, and then to the left are these palm trees. Now, how many talk shows have you seen where there are palm trees in the? I mean, it's a pretty consistent icon if you're doing a talk show or set
in California or Florida.
Yeah.
You have palm trees in the background, right? So Rick, he sees this and he goes, "Can you believe that? Her set is Epstein Island. That is just sick." And you can see his face contorts into this kind of gargoyle-like feature as his face turns red because of horizontal lines and palm trees. So those are now symbols of Satanism and pedophilia.
No triangles, no lines, no palm trees.
And so I thought, what would they do if they saw an actual satanic symbol? Like, would their brain just implode? Just the other day, I heard one of these QAnon guys was taking photos of some kind of like cheese festival in Wisconsin, and he was saying, "Cheese festival, we know what that's a code for." And so he thought he thought that the cheese festival was some sort of cover, I guess, for the. You would think that by now the pedophiles would have changed their symbolism.
That's the thing too. Like all this, like when Pizzagate first started, they were talking about like these FBI symbols, right? These are the symbols the FBI knows about, and like I had never any way of knowing if any of that was actually true or not.
Right. That's why I said earlier, let's assume that that's true. I don't know if it's true or not either.
Well, this is the thing, Robert. It's like, where do we go from here? Because literally, like where I'm sitting right now, right across the state line in Georgia, there is, in that district, there is a shoe-in to Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's going to be elected because, like, basically the Democrat candidate has already dropped out, so she's running unopposed. So she is going to be going to Congress, and she is a QAnon person. So, I mean, these people are, like, going into government now.
Well, I can say, so where do we go from here? I can say one thing that we should not be doing, which is what happened today, which is banning QAnon from the Facebook platform. That's the last thing you should be doing. It's just going to confirm everything that's already been said by Q. It's really, it's pure nonsense. I can't imagine that rational people could not come to that conclusion by themselves. And so that's why I stopped for a moment, and I have to kind of half jokingly wonder if Facebook wants you to believe in QAnon. You know, it's like those old anti-drug posters where you know, they would show a guy with a gun up his nose, and it would say, you know, drugs blow out your brains, or this whole the fried egg commercial, and
this is your brain
and all
on
that,
drugs.
where this is your brain on drugs, and all of it. I remember at the time even thinking this when I was a teenager, thinking it's almost like the drug commercials are specifically designed to make you take drugs. So when I see moves like this of deplatforming, that's the term they use for it, which just means censoring someone. When I hear about them deplatforming QAnon, I can't imagine that any rational person could not immediately predict what's going to happen as a result of that. Of course, the only thing you can do is that's the reason I wrote these articles, was because I would hope that, now obviously Salon, you know, I mean, you should see the fan mail I've got. Here, I'll read you one. This was sent to me on September 8th, and the subject headline is the subject headline is Kami Pinko.
Oh, there you go.
And it says, Sudi, you're disturb you while enjoying adrenochrome. You are all sick mother duckers. You're lower than CNN. Go fuck yourselves. MAGA, exclamation point, exclamation point. Then it says, fucking wiggers, WHIGGERS, sent from my iPhone X. Okay. Now, I don't know. It's funny that he went out of his way to say mother duckers instead of motherfuckers, but then he said, go fuck yourselves. I thought that was contradictory. And then, so Salon, you know, I published it on Salon, which obviously is a pit of Kami Pinko. So I don't know. But then again, a lot of QAnon people, they hate read things. So my hope would be that someone would read it, see that I actually know what I'm talking about. I'm not just absolutely dismissing everything 100%. I'm laying down, like, this is where it comes from. Whereas a lot of these people, they don't know what to make of it. So, like, you'll see articles in the Atlantic Monthly, and they're trying to wrap their head around it, and they can't. They've never seen anything like it before. So they're just, like, it's just like a panic essay about QAnon. And so the QAnon people read it and see that the person writing it doesn't know what the hell they're talking about, and they just dismiss it. I would hope that someone, you know, at least one person would be able to read it and go, oh, you know what? Yeah, I didn't notice that before. Yeah, it really is just a patchwork quilt of all these other pre-existing conspiracy theories. And particularly, you know, another example of the way that they take a pre-existing conspiracy theory and flip it is, you know, the whole core of the thing is this, you know, child, you know, endangering children. Children are being tortured. The Franklin cover-up by John W. DeCamp, it's all about a pedophile ring. You know, it's a true crime book about a pedophile ring operated by prominent Republicans, like this Nebraska businessman, Lawrence E. King Jr., and it was reportedly a crime ring that overlapped with Iran-Contra money laundering schemes operating out of the Reagan-Bush White House. So they've taken this Republican scandal and flipped it so that it involves nothing but liberal Democrats. But that's an example of, you know, when and I wonder if that's where the Hunter S. Thompson aspect came from. Because John DeCamp mentions at one point that he had gotten a story from someone that a guy calling himself Hunter Thompson had met with these people in Las Vegas to buy these snuff films of children being, like, tortured and killed on film. And when I read that, and I read the book when it came out, so it was at some point in the mid to late 90s, I remember thinking, well, obviously, whoever met with these guys had a sense of humor, like a really sick sense of humor, and decided to call himself Hunter S. Thompson because he's in Las Vegas buying the buying these snuff films, but there have been other people who interpreted that, no, that was actually Hunter S. Thompson. So I don't know why you'd give your real name if you're meeting with someone covertly in Las Vegas to buy snuff films. But, you know, that's actually wrapped up in the, there are rumors as to why Hunter S. Thompson's third book of letters have not been published, even though the third book of letters was supposed to come out originally back in like 2005, and then they keep putting up ISBN numbers for it on Amazon, and then it'll be pulled. So they keep announcing it and then pulling it. And one of the rumors was that at the time Hunter S. Thompson was supposedly actually looking into this story about Lawrence A. King and the Franklin cover-up and how it overlapped with the Reagan, and that he'd actually been looking into this at the time. And there are some letters in there that deal with that. And one of the rumors was that that's the reason that the book keeps getting pulled. But that, again, this is all, it could be fake news.
There was rumors about, you know, why he killed himself too and all that, you know.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, there's the infamous, I wouldn't be surprised. You know, Hunter S. Thompson actually went on a radio show not long before he died and said, "Hey, if something happens to me, just know, you know, it was." I wouldn't do that to myself. It was an assassination. Meanwhile, everyone around him says, "Oh, he talked about suicide all the time." So, you know, Hunter S. Thompson had a trickster kind of quality to him. So yeah. I wouldn't doubt that he actually went on the air and said, "Yeah, hey, if I end up dead, it wasn't at my hand, you know, just to confuse things,
just to cause some shit." Yeah.
Yeah. But also. Here, I'll read you one more. This is another fan letter. This is from Twitter, September 14th. It says, biggest load of biased cack I've read since the last CNN article I wasted my life reading. Both of these, the last two I read, both reference CNN. So these guys like monitor CNN more than I do. I don't know why they both mention CNN. And then it says, who the fuck gives a poop about your opinion apart from the, and then there's an icon of a sheep, that can't think for themselves. You don't know everything there is to know. Let people think for themselves and come to a design. Now, leaving aside the fact that I never once claimed to know everything there is to know in the 5 parts of the article, but how does writing a series of informational articles about QAnon prevent people from thinking for themselves? It's implied in the statement as the idea that the only way people can be allowed to think for themselves is if they're never exposed to points of view different from their own. In other words, like how does me publishing this article prevent this guy or anyone else from coming to their own conclusions? That's something that's a trend I see on both the right and the left, and that is, if you disagree with something, I don't want to read it, and I don't want anyone else to read it either. Which is that I see as also a paradigm shift. You know, I mean, if you can get a bunch of libertarian militia people to decide to flip their minds and decide that they'll accept martial law, you could also do a similar experiment to get a bunch of ex-hippie boomers who have always been anti-censorship and who, you know, circled the wagons around people like Salman Rushdie in the late 80s to flip their opinions and decide that censorship is the solution to any and all problems. And if there's one guy offended by something, even just one person is offended by it, we need to either unpublish it, remove it, prevent everyone else from seeing it. So that too is, when I say that there's a sociological experiment going on, I don't mean it's just directed at the right. I see similar experiments being directed at the left as well.
Oh yeah, there's definitely stuff like that going on. I mean, that's, you know, there's all kinds of like weird disinformation that has been put into the left too.
Operation Mindfuck 2.0.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been excellent, Robert. I mean, wow. I mean, we really covered some ground tonight, and I still don't think there's like a lot. There's a lot we still could have covered. Yeah. And all
I would really just suggest everyone go check out those 5 articles on Salon for a great primer on it, and it's I'm really glad you're able to do that. It's something that I've been using to kind of direct people who are less familiar with it, you know, who just hear about it and stuff, and it's a really good explanation from a veteran conspiracy theorist. I think only people like you could really give people a good explanation to give that context.
Yeah.
That was one of the reasons I wrote it, because I wrote in Cryptoschatology, my first book. There's a chapter in there called Jesus is a Robot from Outer Space, and it was all about this. I happened to say that phrase in the context is hard to describe, but if you read the chapter, it's all explained. But I happened to say that in front of a class, and I got into trouble for saying that Jesus is a robot from outer space, which was not meant to be a literal comment. And so that in the article, it ties into George W. Bush. And so there's another chapter in the book called George W. Bush is Not a Christian. And so the article is all about how, if you look at the policies of the George W. Bush administration, these are not Christian tendencies or actions, even though he professes to be a Christian. And so I quoted, there's a Christian, there was a Christian writer who wrote a whole book about George W. Bush, criticizing him from that perspective. And in the article, I said something like, the only people who would listen to this, the only people who have the authority to make a statement like that are other Christians. So it's really beholden to Christians to go out and say this, because you're the people who other people would listen to. And so when I saw the QAnon stuff, I thought, there's kind of a similar principle here. The only people that have the authority to talk about this are people who actually know about the conspiracies that have been pilfered to create this patchwork.
Exactly.
So it's really beholden on the people who do know about these things to go out and say, hey, this is actually where it's all coming from.
Absolutely. And we really, really appreciate that. I hope, I think it's really going to do some good and put some pieces together for people.
I hope so.
Robert, tell everybody where they can find your books and what books that you have out. And you actually have a book coming out here pretty soon, I believe.
If all goes well, I will have multiple books coming out next year in 2021. Hollywood Haunts the World will be one of them, which will cover cinema from 1921 to 2021. So it will cover 100 years of Hermetic, occult, Masonic, Gnostic symbolism in cinema. And then it appears that these QAnon articles will evolve into a full-length book as well. And I have a collection of 4 novellas coming out from Eraserhead Press. That book is called Widow of the Amputation and Other Weird Crimes, which is 4 novellas that all take place in different areas of Southern California. And the title story, Widow of the Amputation, is all about a road trip between Charles Manson and the severed head of Mary Magdalene. So I think Adam Gorightly will like that one. And others as well. Some of these things are there are various projects going on at once, but I think those 3 will definitely come out next year. And Camelio, Cryptoschatology, Spies and Saucers, Until the Last Dog Dies, and my latest book, which I wrote with my friend Gary Rhodes, which is a cinema book called Bela Lugosi and the Monogram 9. All 5 of those books are available on Amazon.
Excellent. We'll have to get you back on when the Hollywood book comes out. We should get you back on for the Bela Lugosi one too. I'd have to sit down and read it. But that's excellent, Robert. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for inviting me on.
Stay on the line for us. We're going to close this section out, and we will be right back on Conspirinormal. Okay, guys. Welcome to little special segment of the show. And we wanted to bring on Jason Von Stein, who you guys have heard many times on this show if you're a longtime listener. Jason is actually my cousin, and if you were a part of both Strange Realities, both last year's and this year's, you saw some strange guy dressed up as randomly as the Macho Man, and just distributing Slim Jims to the masses.
What does it take to get a Slim Jim sponsorship?
Yeah,
Seriously.
Well, we're gonna be a little more serious about what we're gonna talk about tonight. But Jason, welcome back to Conspirinormal.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much for letting me be a part of the fun.
Yeah, man. I think last year, I think it was back in February, we talked about a Kickstarter that you were doing, and I think that some things probably got thrown off track because of COVID hitting not too long after that and all that.
Yeah.
So you've kind of retooled this, but go ahead and tell everybody what it is that you're doing and why, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Okay, so to start off, my father, his name's Jim Von Stein, and he's a songwriter. And he's been writing songs all of his life. He's written thousands of songs. He still writes songs. Unfortunately, he has emphysema and COPD, so he can't play music anymore, like strumming or guitar. The exertion is too much. When you have emphysema and COPD, you have like fluid in your lungs. He's on oxygen, and he has to walk around. It's hard to walk around. It's hard to get around. Like changes in atmosphere, changes in even like open a fridge, like makes it difficult. So playing the guitar is not really possible anymore. So I started playing his music out because I've grown up listening to. My dad's been writing music all of my. I'm 38 now. My dad's been writing music all of my life. My dad started writing poetry when he was a child. He was really influenced by a song called Old Shep, about a dog that passes away. My dad heard this when he was a child, and it made him cry, and it really made him appreciate music. And then, of course, the Beatles were a big influence. So he's been writing music all his life, and now I share it out. And this one particular song, Faraway Angel, is one of my favorite songs my dad's written. That's the Kickstarter that we're trying to do. My dad wrote this in 1989, and I've heard this song, since I was a little kid. I thought it was a jamming song. On February, my dad's birthday is February 13th. So I decided I was going to do a Kickstarter for him on February 13th. Because what I did is I did a comic book. I have a website, jackassofalltrades.net. And on that website, I drew a comic book. Anytime you make a music video, or, when you direct a movie, you have storyboards, so you can show people. Storyboards kind of like a comic book version of what you're trying to tell. So it kind of like gets everybody on the same page with what your idea is. So I came up with an idea for this song, Faraway Angel, that involves, it's like a Frankenstein lab. And the doctor, the crazy mad doctor, he's trying to bring this beautiful woman to life. But as he's trying to bring the beautiful woman to life, a bunch of mishaps keep happening. And he starts bringing corpses to life, which are the musicians. And it's all like a big joke. And what I did is I wanted to make it a big joke, and it ends up that the doctor, he kisses the woman after he brings her to life, and it kills him because he gets electrocuted, because the conducting element is lightning from the sky, and they're manipulating it like a 1900s kind of film, something really early, black and white. And he walks off with the help kind of deal.
So there's a kind of a paranormal theme here a little bit.
Right,
horror
yeah,
movie
exactly.
Theme, yeah.
That's what I was going for. I was really remember like Tales from the Crypt that used to scare me a lot as a kid, and then Looney Tunes were always a big influence, and black and white films, and so I wanted to I thought that would be kind of a cool concept for the song Faraway Angel. Even though when my dad wrote the song, it's more about a guy that's probably broken up with a girl, and he's like missing her and longing for her love. If you read the lyrics of the song, it's not necessarily that. But it could be different takes. Like my mother actually came up with an idea where it could be about a woman who's an astronaut, and she's the faraway angel. She's like going up to space, and you can make it to where the person, they're not breaking up, but the husband is like missing her because she's going to be out in the atmosphere for a really long time. I just don't have the budget for space. Turns out I don't have the budget for anything. So there you go. I got a budget for an imagination. But getting back to jackassofalltrades.net, I drew a comic book version of this idea I just explained in the castle with the mad scientist, and you can find it on there. So in February, I decided I'm going to make like a music video of this, or I'm going to try to make a Kickstarter. We made a Kickstarter for one of my dad's songs in 2017 for a Christmas gift for a song called Streets of Chicago. And it took a lot of work and a lot of love, but it turned out to be a great project. So I kind of was hoping to replicate that. So we ended up starting it, and I went through the casting process to find all the people that were needed. And the musicians were going to play the parts of the, musicians in the music video. We were going to do a one-day shoot. And we started February 13th, and it was to end on March 13th. But by March 13th, the world had changed significantly. So we didn't really have, I didn't even want to do it, even though I love my dad so much, because I didn't want to put anybody in harm's way. Even getting everybody together on one day, we didn't know what we're facing with COVID. And I don't want to be the guy to bring everybody together and something fun ends up getting everybody sick. My dad wouldn't want to get everybody sick with his music. I wouldn't want to get anybody sick with my dad's music. We're not that, we don't want to do that. So I just figured we need to put it on the back burner. But now my uncle, your father, Adam, is a retired art teacher.
Yes.
So the game has changed a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to do another Kickstarter for the same music video idea, but this time instead of having actors, we're going to have Uncle Mike make puppets of all the actors. And then we'll just, me and Adam are going to work together, and the plan is to create the same music video that you can find on that comic book on jackassofalltrades.net, but a music video version of it. And I've also got a bunch of great musicians that have worked together, and we've got an awesome audio track, a jamming track of this coming out on Halloween.
Cool.
Yeah, so you've got several things going on with this all at once, and like your the Kickstarter is up. I think, was it yesterday? We're recording this on the 6th, so I think that it was yesterday, right?
Actually, I waited till today to make it to where you're the first, the inaugural. Yeah.
Yeah, this will come out actually next week, but actually, this Kickstarter is going to be all the way through the 31st, right?
That's correct. And on the 31st, you can actually get on, if you go to Spotify, you can type in Von Stein. It's VON space STEIN. And you can hear a previous track, Mr. Misery. You can put that on your playlist. You can pre-save this track for Faraway Angel. It's going to be available on Halloween, October 31st, 2020. So you can put it as part of your rotation if you'd like. It's also going to be coming out on iTunes and all the other distribution services. So, and it's really, I had a lot of great friends. I worked, so the previous track we released, Streets of Chicago, we did that at a friend of mine, his name's Sean Allen. He's a great producer. Mm-hmm. And I had my friend Barrett Roth, he played electric guitar on that. And if you watch the Streets of Chicago music video, in the music video, the concept of that music video for Streets of Chicago, it's actually really cool. We had a $1,000 budget. And I don't think that you would expect we had that kind of budget if you watched it, because it's like a city, and it's like Jesus and the devil are walking towards one another in the city. And as they get closer to one another, like as they're walking in front of things happening in the background, like people are doing things. Like at the beginning, there's a woman in Jesus' scene. He walks past her, and her flowers she smells them, and they're very beautiful. And in the same scene, the devil walks past that woman, and all the flowers die. And it gets zanier and zanier as it goes. At one point, Jesus walks past a beautiful woman that is a librarian. And then the devil walks past the same woman, and she's dressed up like very scandalous. She looks very beautiful and very vivacious. And at that point, the guitar player in the music video, his guitar like falls apart because he sees her, and she's so beautiful, he's distracted, and the guitar fell apart. So that's my friend Barrett, and it's funny because that's actually his wife Sydney that's playing the role of the librarian and the temptress, so to speak. So they got a kick out of that he's lusting over her or whatever. But Barrett is actually a really good. He's an incredible. Besides being an incredible person and an incredible musician, guitar player, he's an incredible sound engineer himself. So on July 4th, we went to his house and we decided we're going to throw down a track. For Faraway Angel. Barrett did all the sound engineer work. He played the electric guitar on it. He played the bass guitar. He did the arrangement. He went really close to what my father's version of it is, but my father, he always played the song, basically solo. We played with neighbors and friends, but my dad never really had like a band. But he's always been open to having a band to all of his music. My dad loves all music, all kinds, all instruments. He's, open to anything. And that was always his plan. He actually had a if he ever could open a band, he would call it 13 Dogs, and he'd have at least 13 instruments because he loves music that much, you know. So we did that. We did like a band track of this. Barrett did the sound engineer, the electric, and the bass. We had Matt Urbanek. He's a drummer here in Atlanta. We had him throw down a drum track. He's also an incredible musician. You can check him out on Facebook. He's an incredible songwriter. He writes a lot of different songs too. And then we had an incredible musician named Mark T. Williams. And he's an incredible violin player. This guy's such a good violin player when he warms up to like the Godfather theme song. It's like sad. I feel like I'll be like, you know, we're going to play a show and I'm in the bathroom urinating and I hear the Godfather theme song. I'm like, this is too pretty for me to be urinating to. I feel bad, like, you know. But he's incredible. I did a show once with him and Barrett actually on May 4th at Smithsonian Bar, and we dressed up as Star Wars characters. And I dressed up as Princess Leia, and Mark dressed up as Darth Maul. And his violin would change. It was like a lightsaber, and it changed all the different colors of lightsabers throughout the set. You can actually find it if you go to if you type in Von Stein on YouTube. I live stream, and I record all of the shows that I'm a part of. And now I host a couple of shows a week here in Atlanta. And I also upload those. So if you want to see a lot of good entertainment, you guys trying to get your mind off of all the craziness of the world, you might want to check that out. It's free entertainment. A lot of good comedy, a lot of good music. I'm really blessed. My dad's such an amazing person and such a great songwriter that he has opened up opportunities for all these other people. I host shows on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and that's all because of Dad's songs. It's crazy.
Jason really has a passion for all this, and guys, if you want to support this Kickstarter, by all means, please do. Give everybody where they can find that. And I'll put it in the show notes as well. But where people can find for the URL for people to find the Kickstarter.
If you go to Kickstarter and you type in Faraway Angel Round 2, we'll pop up. So
if
you type in Faraway Angel, you can see what happened at Round 1, and you can. There's a couple of them, but Round 2 is the current round that we're on. So we'll see.
Yeah, and you set the goal not too very high on this actually. So
no, I set it as $500 because previously we were going to need a lot of money for makeup and some special effects and stuff like that. But now that we don't need all that makeup necessarily, it kind of cuts down the cost. Plus, previously we actually, the other Faraway Angel music video with all the actors and everything, I was going to ask for $2,000 because that was kind of what we needed. But we cut that down significantly. It's $500 that we need to make this music video. And I just want to make something cool. The plan is if we get the funding, so we're going to release a track on Halloween, but then we'll release this music video on my father's birthday next year, February 13th. And that'll give us enough time to figure out how to make puppets work and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the puppets are actually already built. And we'll be putting pictures up soon on the Kickstarter as well. So
yeah, Uncle Mike, Adam's father, has done an incredible job. It's really cool. Both of our dads came together to make this, this thing. If you think about it, so you had asked, you had just mentioned doing the puppets, and like he just started doing them, and now they're finished. They're like laying down here in the bed. So yeah, I couldn't believe it. He was like already, yeah. So that's the plan. What we'll do is we'll upload a picture. Each day I'm gonna upload new information that you can check out for this Kickstarter. Some of it's gonna be audio bits from the track, information about the musicians involved, but information about Uncle Mike and Adam, and also we're gonna show all the puppets and whatnot. It's really cool. They remind me of 80s music videos I used to watch growing up, which is really kind of like big time, like Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that style, which is really,
really cool. Sergio, was there anything you wanted to ask, or?
Oh no, that just sounds real fun. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, I'm excited to, hopefully everything, it's something special. It's been a lot of work, but it's definitely been worth it. It's a really good song. I'm excited for people to hear it and hopefully pre-save it and follow along.
Right. So let's get the Conspirinormal army out there to throw a little bit of little bit of money your way, and hopefully we'll get this all done. So, Thank you so much, Jason. Give that URL one more time.
If you go to Kickstarter, Faraway Angel Round 2, search for that, and you'll be able to find what you're looking for.
All right, excellent. All right, guys, we'll be back in just a bit.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome back to Conspirinormal, guys. That was a very fascinating discussion with Robert Guffey.
Yeah, and I would just encourage everyone to go check out those articles, and you may be seeing Robert Guffey on some large news outlets soon.
Yeah. I mean, we very well may. This was quite a interesting show. I read these articles yesterday and today, and I think, like we pointed out, that really him being so steeped in the conspiracy world really gives him a good way to look at it, and really gives people like a reason to realize that, hey, that maybe that this is being kind of something that's kind of being manufactured.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, between his crypto scatology book on conspiracy theories art form, and Gullius's book on conspiracy theories, I mean, those two really like the encyclopedias of conspiracy theory to me, as far as like giving a context and having a history laid out if you're looking for something to kind of put all this in perspective. Yeah,
absolutely. I was pretty impressed by those articles, and go check those out, guys. Those are on Salon. They are, see, I'm looking up the title here. I've got it pulled up on what they're called. Making Sense of QAnon, What Lies Behind the Conspiracy Theory That's Eating America. That's the title of it. So you guys go look those up. That's a 5. It's like, I think for like 5 weeks he released those.
Yeah, and he's got a little page now on Salon, little writer page where you can access all of them. Yep.
It was funny too, because as we were like our little like post-show banter, he said that ABC was calling to do like a little spot with him, and he told him that he was going to do Conspirinormal. So he was going to get to them later.
Yeah, right. That's pretty cool, man. He really holds it down, represents. He's really, certified in the history of conspiracy theory and studying it.
Yep, absolutely. That's we're living in definitely a Conspirinormal world. That's for damn sure. So, okay, guys, that's it for this episode. Please, just another thing that you probably heard in the little segment before this, check out Jason Von Stein's Kickstarter for his video for Faraway Angel. We're actually going to play that at the end of this episode, so you guys will know what that sounds like. So, and also our material, Patreon. Please join us there. We were trying to get stuff up every week. We kind of have kind of slacked on that a little bit, especially with Strange Realities Conference, but we're going to get back to all that soon. And that is $1 to join at the moment, but things are probably going to be changing on there pretty soon. We're going to have some new tiers, some new rewards for people to sign up, and all that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Sergio?
Yeah, you can just check us out at Conspirinormal or patreon.com/Conspirinormal. We are going to be doing some new tiers and having some exclusive swag on there. We really want to do a Patreon exclusive t-shirt You can check out our other T-shirts on our TeePublic page, but we want to do one especially for the supporters, and provide some more incentive to help us out and keep the lights on around here. Just patreon.com/Conspirinormal is where you can find us.
Yep, and don't forget the YouTube channel. Go give us a subscribe on there. That'll help as well. And 5-star reviews. Nobody's left a review lately, so help us out with that on iTunes. All right, I think that's it. Join us next week, guys. We're going to have some more interesting, good Conspirinormal stuff on this show. Conspirinormal.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal or leave a one-time donation at Conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.
I've seen the morning sun breaking off a gentle wave. I can almost hear your voice living in the time I've saved. Every night is lonely time, thinking of the days when you were mine. While your love stays on my mind, darkness gets a royal shine. Far away to your own spirit free. Take a hard look at what you've done to me. Only love can heal this hurting me. Far away to come home to me. I wanna hold you now, just to kiss your lips again somehow. I can almost see your face, then it disappears without a trace. I guess I got a thing for you. I'll be sad and I'll be blue, spending days